I'm Vinnie Politan. The subject of my investigation is the tragic death of Texas A&M student Brianna Aguilera, who fell 17 stories to her death. Police quickly said suicide, but her family says not so fast. Here's the story. More than a month after Texas A&M sophomore Brianna Aguilera plunged 17 stories from an Austin apartment balcony, her family is challenging the police conclusion that she died by suicide. Brianna, just 19, was visiting Austin for the Texas A&M University of Texas rivalry game when she fell from a balcony at the 21 Rio apartment complex in the early morning hours of November 28th. Austin police say digital evidence supports suicide, citing a deleted note on her phone and text messages sent to friends expressing suicidal thoughts. But at a Houston press conference, the family's attorney, Tony Busby, presented a neighbor who says she heard loud arguing involving multiple people inside the apartment moments before Brianna fell. Police maintain no evidence points to foul play, but the family insists critical voices were ignored and that Brianna's death deserves deeper scrutiny. Deeper scrutiny is crucial here, and this is the family's looking for a full investigation. They believe like this was the rush to judgment, and they don't believe that Brianna took her own life. They're not saying it was a murder. It could have been an accident. Who knows? But they're saying they don't believe it was suicide and that police did not do a full investigation here. Now you've got a witness coming forward. Let's bring in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. All right, Cody, this witness came forward to the family. Tony Busby, the attorney, they found her. They spoke with her. What is she saying?
Yeah, Vinny, this witness is named Dana Rodriguez, and she says she lived right across the hall from the apartment where this all took place. But she says the police department has not reached out to her despite her willingness to help. Now, she says that night, in November of 2025, her parents were visiting her at the complex, and they could all, her mom, dad, and her, could all hear just about everything going on in that apartment, including loud arguing. Take a listen.
Till this date, the Austin Police Department has not interviewed me or requested a statement. The only thing I have received from the Austin Police Department is a generic email sent to all residents of the 21 Rio apartment complex. At approximately 11 p.m., I began hearing people entering Madeline's apartment. Loud music began playing like a party started. I know this occurred at 11 p.m. because I was FaceTiming my boyfriend and he had made a comment saying, "Oh my gosh, it's so loud, I can hear a party from next door." After speaking with my boyfriend, I visited with my mom and took my dog Bear outside to use the restroom, but she didn't want to go. She wasn't cooperating with me. This was around midnight at the time. Bear did not want to cooperate, so I brought her back inside and asked my mom if she can take Bear outside. And it was kind of weird that my dog didn't want to go outside because
around this time it wasn't really noisy. There wasn't a lot of people going in and out of our apartment. I think they were still at the tailgates or afters. This is the time that people were kind of just partying in their own apartments. I know the time was 12:15 a.m. because that's when I saw my mom returned with my dog Bear. And I also checked my phone when my mom entered the room. I tried to fall back to sleep in my room. My parents were trying to fall asleep in the living room in my apartment on an air mattress. At around 12:30 a.m., I woke up to people yelling at each other. It sounded like they were arguing. I then suddenly heard the sound of a large group of people leave Natalie's apartment. The loud music then was turned off. I recall checking my phone, and this occurred around 12:30 a.m. I tried to go back to sleep. A few minutes later, I began hearing a girl arguing with other people. It sounded like it was multiple people in the apartment pacing back and forth, so it was hard to recall what was said in the arguments. I heard pacing back and forth throughout the apartment, like the arguing was coming closer to the door and heading to the back side of the apartment. My mother commented to me, "Oh my gosh, they keep arguing. I think I'm about to go over there and say something because it's really loud." And Bear, my dog, began barking a lot. She's, mind you, trained to let us know when a burglar comes or when someone's, making a lot of noise. And one thing my dog hates is arguing. So she was growling a lot towards my front door, towards the entrance of their apartment. Shortly afterwards, all of us heard loud screaming, the kind of screaming someone makes when you accidentally drop something. I was letting them know that it was like the type of scream when you drop like an heirloom that's really important and you're like, "Oh my gosh," like really bad, right? My mom commented that she thought maybe they dropped a drink inside, like a glass drink, and it made a mess everywhere and they broke something on accident. My dad said he thought the girls were arguing outside. He thought because he could hear the arguing from our own balcony, that's on the opposite side of their apartment, as if the voices were coming from outside. Anything that happens outside, we can hear everything because it just echoes. I recall my dad saying, "I hope they're not arguing on the balcony, God forbid." Eventually, the loud noises and arguments, screaming stopped. I could still hear conversations going on in Natalie's apartment.
So, Vinnie, just to recap some of the important things she pointed out, what she heard that night. She said her boyfriend on FaceTime could hear the loud noise through the phone. He wasn't there, so the walls were really that thin. She hears pacing back and forth. She hears the arguing was so loud that her mother was compelled to go say something. Her father went on to say that he hopes they weren't arguing on the balcony, and then that weird gasping scream that she heard. Just very eerie, given what we know about this story so far.
Yeah, this is new information. It's absolutely new information. Thanks so much, Cody. He's going to stick around the whole hour. That brings us to the first question in our investigation tonight, and it's about what we just heard. What does this witness account reveal about that night? Joining me, the Chief Public Defender for Oakland County, Michigan. She represented the Oxford High School shooter. Paulette Lofton is with us, and former prosecutor and SLED agent Tommy Pope. Great to have you both here. All right, Paulette, I'll begin with you. From what we just heard from that neighbor, what does it reveal to you?
Well, to me, it reveals that there was a rush to judgment. How can there be a complete investigation without the police speaking to this witness? This witness doesn't have any affiliation with these people, no reason to lie, and she is able to recount to minutes what was happening. We also have her mother and her father, and now we've learned that she was even talking to her boyfriend on video call, and he could hear those noises. Those are all witness statements that need to be taken and need to be examined to see if they line up with all of the statements that were given by the people who were actually in that apartment. I think this is going to be very damaging to the investigation that was done, because I think people are going to start to question, do you not want to know the truth? Like, all everyone wants is a thorough investigation. Why have these people not been interviewed?
Tommy Pope, your thoughts about what this neighbor revealed?
I think Vinnie brings more questions than answers, but I agree with Paulette as far as my biggest fear. I'm a law enforcement guy, but once they make a decision, even with my small town departments, sometimes worse with my small town departments, once they've decided, you couldn't take them off of it no matter what. And there's no pride in making a mistake. The difficulty is when you stick with it when other evidence surfaces. So I agree again with Paulette that the answer is there's a lot more investigation and it needs to be done. I know later you're going to talk about, why law enforcement doesn't want them talking to the victims. There's something odd going on. It could be as simple as law enforcement's egos or hopefully nothing worse than that.
Yeah, my concern is, you have a college town where the university basically is the big deal in town, and you just don't want bad things happening. And it's, the quick result, let's move on. That may or may not be what happened. That's my fear. I'm not saying that's what happened. Okay, Paulette, let's talk about some of the things that she said that they heard. And we know that she goes over the balcony. How that happened is what's in question. But just before that, there are arguments with multiple voices and people moving around. Like, that doesn't make sense. And the people are arguing and moving around. Someone ends up on the other side of the balcony, yet no one from inside, called 911 or knew, allegedly, what had happened to Brianna.
And I think the most damaging part is she describes like a gasping situation, or like people are in a panic. Like she said, it almost sounded like they dropped an heirloom or they dropped a full glass and now there's a huge mess. So is that when this poor girl went over the balcony? Obviously, a party is going to be loud. If there's a number of people in an apartment, the walls are always paper thin in an apartment. So is that normal to hear loud noises if there's a large amount of people? Sure. But here they're describing it as arguments, pacing, arguments, and then that situation where she thought something had dropped or spilled, and then all of a sudden everything ends and everyone leaves. So usually a party dissipates slowly. Something seems like it happened that caused everyone to then exit as quick as possible.
Yeah, I feel like we're just not getting the whole story here, Tommy. And trying to understand the whole story, if you have a neighbor in an apartment like this, and I've been in the apartments that they build for the college kids in all these college towns. Like, they're not putting extra insulation in between the walls. They're just slapping them up and, making money. It's nice for the kids and all, but it's not fancy. It's not high, density type of construction here. So you hear things. I don't understand how there could be something happening in the apartment, someone dies, but nobody knew what happened to the person who died. That's the part I'm having a hard time connecting here.
It's concerning to me too, if you piece it together like Paulette just did, one argument could be the argument of what's causing the trouble. If there was, like I said, they didn't say necessarily they believed that there was criminal activity, but whatever was happening, whatever argument was going on, and then you have that moment perhaps when she goes over the balcony, then you got a new set of argument or discussion about what are we going to do. And, some people leave the scene. I would hope law enforcement has determined everyone that was there, offered a polygraph. I'm not a big fan on polygraph, but I am a big fan on whether you're willing to take it or not. That tells me more than whether you actually, the results of the polygraph. But I wish there was a way that we didn't have to have these civil lawyers coming up with this, because I would have loved us not to hear what we heard tonight. Law enforcement would know that. So now all the people in the room, I could hold their story against what I know to happen that I had not shared with them. You see what I'm saying? Now, everybody in the room, arguably that's out there watching Vinnie, and everybody in the country watches Vinnie, right? So there you have it. So you know what I'm saying? Now they know the story and they can mesh their story with that story. And I wish there'd been a way law enforcement had been more cooperative where we didn't have to hear it through a press conference, because they could make better use of it.
Yeah, and the other thing Tony Busby said is that law enforcement contacted him about his witnesses. Like, shouldn't you guys know already? Like, a 19-year-old was found dead. Okay, guests are sticking around. Coming up next, why would police tell the 3 girls in that apartment not to speak to Brianna's mother?
At no time did any evidence point to this being anything of a criminal nature.
I'm going to ask you a lot of intensely personal questions.
From the crime scene to the courtroom, this is Victim to Verdict.
Everyone has this heightened sense of anticipation.
What a day here at Court TV.
Fireworks both inside and outside the courthouse.
Let the cameras roll. Woman.
They're doing nothing. Their investigation lasted maybe a few days. They drew some hasty conclusions, and then they just quit.
And that's why the parents are upset. The very quick conclusion that they were told regarding Brianna's death, saying it was suicide, and that nothing's happening anymore. The investigation's over. Let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. All right, let's talk about the three people who may or may not have the most information here. The three girls who were in the apartment that night with Brianna. What are they saying?
Well, Vinny, it's more like what aren't they saying, because they haven't said anything. And in fact, Tony Busby says that Austin police told them not to say anything to anyone. Take a listen to this.
They told all of the witnesses not to talk to us. They told the three individuals that were in that apartment that night when this young girl died, they told them, do not speak to Brianna's mother or her lawyers. Now, why would they do that? What possible reason could there be for the police department in Austin to instruct people that were with Brianna at or around the time she died to not speak to Brianna's mother?
And Vinny, you'd imagine these three girls have the answer to that question. I mean, there's been a lot of discrepancy about what happened to that apartment. We had initially heard that the three girls were asleep. Now that seems to be this diminishing story here. But overall, Busby says Brianna's family just wants the truth. They want answers, whatever those answers might be.
Absolutely. And Tony Busby's question is really our next question in our investigation. Why would police tell them, the three girls, not to speak to Brianna Aguilera's mother? The mother of the girl who's dead, who's brokenhearted. And the three girls that are with her at the time saying nothing. And police are telling them to say nothing. Still with me, Public Defender Paulette Lofton, and joining us, former NYPD officer, retired Nassau County Lieutenant and Commanding Officer Mike Gould. Mike, I'm going straight to you. You've been in those shoes. Why would police, in a case where they're saying it was a suicide, tell three witnesses who were the last people with the victim not to speak to the girl's mom?
Yeah, Vinny, thanks for having me. No, that's a head scratcher because I don't really know the logic behind that. And if there was, the PIO, the public information officer, should have been ahead of this story, right? They're leaving so much room for all of us to just speculate and be confounded. I'm confounded by the investigation. If what the attorney said, Busby said, that they didn't do a canvass of the apartment surrounding that balcony and below the balcony, that's unheard of. So for not to send a cop to knock on doors and do a crime scene log and ask, did you hear anything? So that's highly unusual. And I can't for the life of me, if those allegations are true, which they seem to be, the witness, Dana, seemed very credible and straightforward. So something is very odd about this case. And the police are not revealing things that they should be revealing, I don't think.
Now, Paulette, Tony Busby's filed a civil lawsuit to kind of get things going and given him the power to subpoena and speak to people. So these three young girls are going to have to speak. Once they get a subpoena, they're going to be deposed.
Absolutely. I wouldn't think that there'd be a Fifth Amendment issue, but you're right. I think a civil lawsuit was what he had to do to get the information that he needed. There is a very good process of discovery when you file a civil lawsuit, and it seems like, the poor mother here is not getting the answers that she deserves and that she needs to try to close the situation, give her some closure. So I think the civil lawsuit was absolutely the right call here. And hopefully, these girls are going to be able to give their version of events, and then they can compare it with the neighbor across the hall.
Let me ask you this, Mike, because Paulette just, raised an interesting issue. What if, and I'm not saying they're going to, but what if one or more of these three girls, when they're subpoenaed in the civil case, take the fifth? Will police and investigators take notice of that, or will they just brush it off as, oh, it's civil litigation?
Yeah, so I think it's significant. This whole thing is significant that they're asking these witnesses not to speak. That doesn't make any sense. Two things can be true at the same time: accident, suicide, well, either one. But my point is, they're just, the police spokesman is saying they have evidence of suicide. They say they have text and some kind of note or text implying it was a suicide. They should just release that at least to the family members, to the parents. to give them closure. But by not doing that, it just opens up a can of worms. We know there was a lot of alcohol intoxication, so it could very well be an accident. It could be a suicide, and maybe not a homicide. When people are wasted at this time of night, they were tailgating all afternoon. So it could be an accident, not a suicide, but that's a significant difference for the family to know that their child didn't commit suicide. So I don't understand why it's not being revealed.
Yeah.
It's not that complicated.
My understanding is that Busby and the family has seen some of that information because they actually got the phone, and they're disputing that it is an actual suicide note. So there's a difference of opinion of exactly what it was, and it had been deleted, and they recovered it after it had been deleted. So that was like another story. And finally, Paulette, the other thing with police, and then the witness said this, that they just received like a generic email rather than like knocking on the door. I mean, she's found within moments of having jumped or falling off of that 17th floor, yet there wasn't that immediate kind of investigation. It was really strange the way the whole thing transpired. Do you think that this initial, if in fact this ever does lead to a criminal case, and I'm not saying it will, very well could have been an accident or suicide, but if it does lead to a criminal case, will everything that happened here impact the ability to prosecute anyone?
I mean, I think it definitely could. As a defense attorney, that's the first thing I would be bringing up. Why was there a decision made so quickly without, as was just stated, a canvassing of all of the areas of the building? I mean, I see investigation on much less. In a domestic violence situation, they're going to all the neighbors and investigating. What did you hear? What time did you hear it? What did you see? In an actual case where a young girl is found deceased and having fallen number of floors, you would think that that would be so important, especially if the people in the apartment were intoxicated, because obviously you're not going to be able to recall, specific details if you've been drinking for 6 hours. So you want to talk to those other people around the situation, the neighbors, someone that's working the front door, to get a better account of what happened. So I do think that this lapse and this lack of investigation is going to hurt any prosecution that may come after further developments.
All right, Paulette Lofton, great to have you. Thanks so much. Mike is going to stick around. Still to come, there are two different timelines taking place in this case. You've got the family and the investigators and police. Which timeline makes the most sense? I'm Vinnie Politan. We continue our investigation of the tragic death of Brianna Aguilera, who died after falling 17 stories from a balcony. The three girls she was with have not spoken publicly or spoken to Brianna's family, and they want to know why. Here's the story. Brianna Aguilera's final night in Austin has become the center of a growing dispute between investigators and a grieving family demanding answers. Police say the 19-year-old Texas A&M student took her own life, pointing to a deleted suicide note and messages sent to friends the night she fell 17 stories from a balcony at the 21 Rio apartment complex. But Brianna's family, represented by Tony Busby, says the story doesn't end there. A neighbor now claims she heard yelling, pacing, and what sounded like a heated argument involving several people just moments before Brianna plunged to her death. The witness says the screaming suddenly stopped. The family accuses Austin police of failing to interview key witnesses and rushing to judgment before an autopsy was completed. As lawsuits are filed and subpoenas loom, one question remains unresolved. Was Brianna alone on that balcony, or was something else unfolding behind closed doors? So at this point, we're getting information from two different sources, right? You got the police and their investigation. You've got Tony Busby and his investigation on behalf of the family and what this witness who came forward is saying. Let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. All right, let's talk about timelines. We always talk about timelines, right, Cody? So how does the witness who came forward, their account of what happened and their timeline compare to the police timeline?
Well, Vinny, as with many cases that we follow here at Court TV, the timeline has become kind of the focal point here. What was going on that day? What led up to these events? And, you know, we've heard from this new witness, Dana Rodriguez, and her story isn't too far off from the police's. So let's start with hearing from investigators and then from Dana about when Brianna and others arrived at the apartment complex. Take a listen.
At approximately 11 p.m., I began hearing people entering Natalie's apartment.
It was found that Brianna had arrived at the apartment complex just after 11 p.m. on Friday, November 28th, and that she went into a specific apartment on the 17th floor.
All right, Vinny, so 11 p.m., those times line up between police and Dana. So let's move on to what they both say about when the party supposedly ended.
At around 12:30 a.m., I woke up to people yelling at each other. It sounded like they were arguing. I then suddenly heard the sound of a large group of people leave Natalie's apartment.
Video surveillance has confirmed that a large group of friends left that same apartment at 12:30 a.m. on November 29th, leaving just Brianna and 3 other girls in the apartment.
Now, those times also line up, Vinny, 12:30 a.m. Now, of course, this witness, Dana, was not inside the actual apartment where everything took place, so she can't talk about seeing anything. But here's what she says she heard after 12:30 a.m. and what police say about that time frame also.
Shortly afterwards, all of us heard loud screaming, the kind of screaming someone makes when you accidentally drop something. I was letting them know that it was like the type of scream when you drop like an heirloom that's really important and you're like, oh my gosh, like really bad, right? My mom commented that she thought maybe they dropped a drink inside, like a glass drink, and it made a mess everywhere and they broke something on accident. My dad said he thought the girls were arguing outside. Eventually, the loud noises and arguments, screaming stopped. I could still hear conversations going on in Natalie's apartment.
Saturday, November 29th, at approximately 12:54 p.m., I, along with patrol officers, made contact with the residents of that specific apartment that Brianna had been observed going into. The residents informed me that they were trying to report that their friend Brianna was missing. I was able later to confirm they had in fact placed a 911 call at 12:14 p.m. earlier that afternoon to report their friend Brianna was missing. They informed me that they were hosting friends for the Texas A&M football game and that Brianna was supposed to be staying there that preceding evening. I spoke with 3 different female witnesses on scene, as well as later a 4th witness who had left earlier that morning. The investigation showed that Brianna had been at a tailgate party earlier in the day and became intoxicated to a point that she was asked to leave the same tailgate. She had told her friends that she had lost her phone at some point near that tailgate. They had all returned to the apartment where Brianna borrowed a phone of a friend to call an out-of-town boyfriend. Witnesses heard Brianna arguing on the phone with her boyfriend, which was also confirmed later by the boyfriend. Phones from both the phone Brianna used and the boyfriend's phone have confirmed through call logs that call did occur. Now, this call occurred at approximately 12:43 to 12:44 a.m., approximately 1 minute. This is 2 minutes before the 911 call of the body found down below on the pavement.
Now, Vinny, though portions of both of these timelines kind of mirror each other, Tony Busby says he still thinks there are some inconsistencies, and here's why. Take a listen.
Previously, we were told that the people inside the apartment had been asleep for several hours, didn't know where Brianna was, and didn't know that she was really even missing until 12 the next day. What we just heard there is that there was arguing and fighting going on at 12:30 up until 12:45, and there was a lot of things pacing back and forth and that sort of thing. Now, what does that mean? That's why we have police. That's why we do investigations, and that hasn't been done. Recall, the police say that witnesses claim Brianna had a brief conversation with her boyfriend 2 minutes before the 911 call came, where she was found below dead. Police say she made that brief phone call to her boyfriend on a friend's phone They've never been able to explain that how did she get into her friend's phone if her friend was asleep? How did she return the phone to her friend if her friend was asleep? And now we've discovered that if you ask the boyfriend, that the last time he actually spoke to Brianna was at 9:44 p.m., not, as they suggest, at 12:43. Their timeline is completely trash. What the police have told us is simply not physically possible. Based on our investigation, we've concluded that Brianna didn't make that phone call herself, the phone call that the police claim that was made at 12:43 with someone else's phone. And what does it mean? It either means that if she did make that call, she was with someone else at the time the call was made, which would have been the time she went over that railing. Either scenario raises significant questions that warrant exploration.
So, Vinnie, we have some parts that line up and some parts that Tony Busby says are still questionable, but I guess that's why this investigation is still ongoing.
Yeah, a major discrepancy here as you get closer to the time that she goes over the railing. Thanks so much, Cody. That brings us to the next question in our investigation. Which timeline makes the most sense here? What Tony Busby is laying out or what police laid out? Still with me, former NYPD officer Mike Gould, former prosecutor and SLED agent Tommy Pope. All right, Mike, your thoughts here. Which one seems to make more sense to you? And what further questions do you have here? It seems to be a discrepancy about whether or not the boyfriend is called moments before she goes over the rail.
Right. So this should be a pretty straightforward investigation. We have all the digital phone evidence. We have surveillance cameras going in and out. We have ear witnesses next door. So I'm not sure. So frankly, Busby's, the attorney's explanation is compelling and lacking any responses from the police department. That's the one that makes more sense, if that's the question. So as I said, the public information, they should be ahead of these things and clearing this up with the evidence they have. The evidence either exists or it doesn't exist. Yeah, the alcohol intoxication, I envision a bunch of really wasted people. She got told to leave a tailgate party. So intoxication, accidents, suicides, they're all in the same sphere, so to speak. They all can be triggered by highly intoxicated people.
Let me ask you, Tommy, because there's two parts of the discrepancy that I'm seeing here. One is call versus no call to the boyfriend, and it wasn't from her phone. It would have been from someone else's phone that was in the apartment because she lost her phone that day. So it was one of the three other girls who was in the apartment. It would have been one of their phones. The other part was the witness told Tony Busby and the public about hearing this this screaming part where it was like something happened. And that is not anywhere in the police description of their timeline. What are your thoughts about which one makes more sense? He's gone. Mike Gould, go.
Well, I would say that, again, Busby's explanation sounds more feasible. And you know, Vinny, dogs in apartment buildings make great ear witnesses. If a body lands on the ground, dogs on almost every floor of that building going down would be barking. Then you would just interview. The lack of the details of the investigation, the canvas. In a civil case, if the first thing, they didn't interview the next door neighbor. They don't have that in a crime scene log. That's going to be very damaging, I think, for the police, unfortunately.
Absolutely. All right. Wow. I'm still shocked that you don't have the most thorough investigation when a 19-year-old loses her life this way. I think we have Tommy Pope back. Tommy, your thought?
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay. Your thought about the two different timelines in play here. Which makes more sense to you?
It's torturous. Vinny, I think it's torturous for this family. It's like Mike saying, all of these things sound like they're very simple answers, and even the family's left on the outside. It'd be one thing if they weren't sharing it with us and sharing it with the media for whatever investigative reasons, but I mean, the boyfriend's got the answer. Either I talked to her or I didn't. You know, did the phone ring and he didn't answer it? Because The first pass, when you hear it, you think, well, there you have it. They argued. She was so upset. She went over the rail. But again, the folks she was staying with, the three girls she was staying with, again, either law enforcement has the answers they're not sharing with the victim's family, or there's more answers or more questions that need to be asked. And I've had victims before do exactly the same thing. We would represent them on a civil case because you could use depositions, you could use some tools that law enforcement can't use just to get them answers. And it's almost like they're being re-victimized. And maybe Austin's got a perfectly good reason, the PD, on why this is happening, but it needs to play out with the family in full knowledge, so the law enforcement's not hunkering down and the victims are suffering again.
Yeah, and Tony Busby and the family, they're not going away. I know that for sure. You can even, all right, Tommy Pope's going to stick around. Mike Gould, great to have you. Thank you so much. Coming up next, is it suspicious that the student who rented the apartment never came back?
The Austin Police Department formed a conclusion within hours of this tragedy that this was a suicide without any investigation.
School shooting that broke hearts around the country and broke trust with law enforcement.
Now, the officer sworn to protect those students faces a jury.
The Uvalde School Massacre Trial. Live coverage weekday mornings on Court TV. 8 hours of back-to-back true crime cases every Saturday.
This is crazy.
On America's original true crime obsession. 48 hours on Court TV. Saturday starting at 4/3 Central on Court TV.
Who was with Brianna on that balcony when she went over the balcony? Who was with, and why did she go over the balcony? That's the question, and the police don't seem to be interested in the answer to that question.
That's an important question. The police are saying no one was. At first, they allegedly told the family that everyone was sleeping, that she was out there by herself, and that the girls in the apartment had no idea where she was. So that might explain their perspective, but obviously the family not believing that. All right, let's bring back in Court TV field reporter Cody Thomas. Let's talk about the student who rented that apartment where Brianna was staying. What do we know about her?
Well, Vinny, according to the new witness that we've now heard from, Dana Rodriguez, she says this girl's name was Natalie. Now, of course, Natalie was living life as a college student, having parties and doing things that a normal college student does, but after Christmas break, Natalie never came back. Take a listen to what Dana Rodriguez had to say about that.
My understanding is Natalie immediately vacated her apartment after Brianna died. And over the Christmas break, my parents and I saw through the peek hole, that's how close her door is, her parents were grabbing things from her apartment, vacating out of the apartment. I do not believe the police were ever in Natalie's apartment during this investigation. My parents would have notified me. I would have known. That's how much I can hear the footsteps and everything from my apartment. The walls are just so thin.
And Vinny, you know, aside from all the legal stuff going on in this story, it's kind of hard not to blame the parents of this student. I mean, you know, having to live somewhere where something like that happened, it has to be a nightmare, especially if you truly had nothing to do with it at the end of the day, if that's how this story eventually unfolds.
Absolutely. It's tough. It's an apartment connected to a death. There's no way around it. However it happened, it is connected. Thanks so much. Great work tonight, Cody. Appreciate it. And that brings us to the final question in our investigation. Is it suspicious that the student never returned to the apartment? Someone died going over the ledge of that apartment. Is it suspicious that she never came back? Joining me, psychotherapist Dr. Lisa Palmer, and still with us, former prosecutor Tommy Pope. Let me ask you, Dr. Palmer, what are your thoughts here? Is it suspicious, or is that expected? Is that kind of like a normal response? Someone who was staying in that apartment died. That young woman never went back.
I mean, I think that's a normal response. If I was in that situation, I probably wouldn't want to go back there either. But I do find that the friends were a bit suspicious in how long they took to report. And I find it all to be a little bit weird. And I feel that you know, with everything and the way that everything is going in the investigation, there has to be a lot more to be looked at in order to be able to make these determinations, to look at the context of, you know, even the affects of these friends. What are the affects of friends? We don't know.
Yeah. While I have you here, Dr. Palmer, I wanted to ask you about what Brianna's family is going through and how important will this civil lawsuit be for them and to be able to get answers to questions from people who aren't talking?
I would imagine they're going through a lot of grief and confusion right now and trying to figure out and try to get answers, because there isn't even a COD as a cause of death to Brianna. So of course they're very confused, and the mom was very close to Brianna. So none of this makes sense. Brianna was a motivated young girl. She wanted to go to law school. And it's very confusing for the family. There's so many unanswered questions in this case, including some differences in opinions between, you know, what the police department is saying versus what the family knows Brianna. And so until there is a more thorough investigation, it's very unclear at this point as to what really happened to her.
Tommy, let me ask you about one thing that the witness said, that she doesn't believe that police ever went inside the apartment. Is that possible, that you have a case of someone going over the railing of an apartment that they never went there? And if they didn't, how much of a problem would that be?
I think I would be extremely surprised, Vinnie, if they didn't. Now, if you wanted to really be critical, you could say, did they not do it because they didn't have a search warrant? They didn't want to take the time to go get one. I'd like to think that that's not the case. But, you know, with the folks that live there, I'm very interested, of the three, who was their connection? I've got a daughter that's in college, 20, and, you know, they always have like a wingman or a buddy, or, you know, if she went, you know, to a different college for the ball game, she had a friend she was there with. So I want to know, one of those three, is that friend helping the family sort things out? I know, again, if it was my daughter KK's friends, you know, they'd be here, their family would be here, they'd be helping us try to get to the bottom of it. So, you know, and I agree with the girl not going back to the apartment. That doesn't necessarily surprising, as long as she hadn't disappeared, as long as she's maintaining contact, you know, for law enforcement purposes or otherwise, you know, that doesn't overly concern me. But I feel like every question we ask, Vinnie, it begets three more questions.
Yeah.
That if you just got law enforcement and the family and these witnesses in the room, you could straighten it out. And, you know, I mean, tragedies happen, suicides do happen, alcohol contributes to that, drugs contribute to that.
Just want the definitive answer.
Left the family hanging.
We're out of time. Big thanks, Dr. Lisa Palmer, Tommy Pope. Appreciate it so much. And I also agree with everyone. I would not send my child back to that apartment either. I wouldn't let him go. Tony Busby, you know him, folks. He's aggressive, a very successful attorney. You can ask Diddy about that. But this case doesn't look like it's really about going after money. It's about answers for a family. And I don't care what police say. The three young ladies who were at the apartment when Brianna died need to speak. Not to me, not to you, but to Brianna's family. Their silence is cruel. I'm Vinnie Politan. We'll keep digging for answers as the investigation continues.